And, like, put aside the fake news, conspiracy theory, I don't trust you, you don't trust me, I don't listen to them, I don't watch that channel, and believe whatever you want. The only doctrine that is unacceptable is hate. Have different ideas, different philosophies, different beliefs. But if your ideas are rooted in hate, at some point it's going to lead to something like this.
Hi, I'm Dave Stotts from Thru History. Join me as we remember 9/11. The September 11th strikes against America, often referred to as 9/11, were a series of 4 coordinated terrorist attacks by the Islamic group Al-Qaeda. It was the morning of Tuesday, September 11th, 2001.
American 11, climate table level 350. American 11, Boston. American 11, Boston. American 11, if you hear Boston Center, ident please or acknowledge.
American Airlines emergency line, please state your emergency.
Hey, this is Nitty, American Airlines calling. I am monitoring a call in which Flight 11, the flight attendant is advising our reps that the pilot and everyone's been stabbed. They can't get into the cockpit, is what I'm hearing.
He turned his transponder off, so we don't have a definitive altitude for him.
Okay, the aircraft is erratic again. Traffic is very erratic.
They seem to think that he is descending.
Is that American 11 trying to call?
We have some planes. Just stay quiet and you'll be okay. We are turning to the airport. Nobody move. Everything will be okay. If you try to make any move, you'll injure yourself and the airplane. Just stay quiet.
You guys heard anything from American? No. Okay, we think there might be somebody in the cockpit right now taking it over.
It appears to have turned south-southwestbound. Also, there was some mention of some sort of a threat.
Franklin in New York, Boston. I got a little situation with American 11, American 11, 767 departed Boston, going to LAX. Possible hijack. Where's he landing? We don't know where the aircraft is going.
Okay, we've got the flight attendants on the line here. She started screaming and saying something's wrong, and now he's having trouble. Oh, the hijackers are in the cockpit.
Oh, no.
We just had a plane crash into Alpha 4 on the World Trade Center. The World Trade Center, tower number 1, is on fire. The whole outside of the building, there was just a huge explosion.
United 175, New York. United 175, do you read New York?
Is he descending for the building also? He's descending really quick too, yeah. That's another situation. We have a number of floors on fire. It looked like the plane was aiming towards the building.
Financial center, we heard a big bang, and then we saw smoke coming out, and everybody started running out, and there was smoke everywhere, and people were jumping out the windows.
We have fire on several floors, the upper floors of the World Trade Center. Roll every available ambulance you got.
Hello, Command Center? Yes, sir. American 77 disappeared off our radar scope. We now believe that aircraft may have been hijacked.
Third aircraft hijack heading towards Washington.
Pentagon just got hit.
Go for 06. It looks like that aircraft crashed into the Pentagon.
There's a 737, I think it was, crashed into the Pentagon.
You got United 93? United 93, verify 350.
It's climbed, turned, and is not talking to us. So do we want to scramble? We got a couple local military here.
They just lost his transponder. He's heading eastbound. The aircraft is descending.
United 93, have you got information on that yet?
Yeah, he's down.
He's down?
Yes.
When did he land? Because we have confirmation.
He did not land.
Oh, he's down?
That's the last report. They don't know exactly where.
Four passenger airliners, which had departed from airports in the northeastern United States, were hijacked by 19 Islamic terrorists. Two of the planes were crashed into the north and south towers of the World Trade Center in New York City. A third plane was crashed into the U.S. Pentagon in Arlington, Virginia. And a fourth plane, heading towards Washington, D.C., crashed into a Pennsylvania field after the passengers fought back against their hijackers. According to scholars, 9/11 ended up being the single deadliest terrorist attack in human history. There were 2,977 killed, over 25,000 injured, and more than $10 billion in property damage. It was also the single deadliest incident for U.S. emergency personnel, with 343 firefighters and 72 police officers killed that day. To further investigate and honor the history of 9/11, let's start in New York City. New York is a city of skyscrapers. The skyscraper, or high-rise building, was an American invention that combined some important new technologies from our burgeoning industrial capabilities. A massive steel superstructure with electrically powered elevators. Before this breakthrough, buildings were limited to about 6 stories, the limit that people were willing and physically able to walk up and down. Over the 20th century, America prospered, and New York, the biggest city in America, built one very tall building after another, and in the process became the world capital of trade, finance, and modern media. The American competitive spirit meant that each new skyscraper sought to be better and taller than the last. The Empire State Building held the tallest building record for years, and its silhouette became an emblematic symbol of the city, state, and national ambition. The race to the clouds culminated in the Twin Towers of the World Trade Center. When constructed, it would become the new symbol of modern American power, style, importance, and influence. Construction of the World Trade Center's 16-acre Manhattan campus began in 1966. At the time, this was one of the biggest construction projects ever attempted by mankind. The Twin Towers would stand 110 stories high, have 10 million square feet of space, with a capacity for up to 50,000 people. This was a medium-sized American city rising high into the air. At the ribbon-cutting ceremony on April 4th, 1973, New York Governor Nelson Rockefeller said, "It's not too often that we see a dream come true. Today, we have." Just 28 years later, that dream would become a nightmare as a murderous Saudi Arabian terrorist group based in far-off Afghanistan launched its attack on America. At the time of the attack on September 11th, 2001, there were over 400 businesses and tens of thousands of people in the World Trade Center. None of the people going to work on that day could have imagined the hell that was about to be unleashed.
You have a second plane into the other tower of the Trade Center. Major fire. Another one just hit the building. Wow.
hit it hard. The whole building just came apart. Holy smokes.
Green 6, that's the other tower. Another plane hit the second tower. Green 3 to Manhattan, urgent. Major collapse in one of the towers. The south tower, major collapse. The other tower just collapsed. Major collapse. Major collapse. The World Trade Center collapsed. Building 2 has collapsed. We had to collapse to the second tower. Everybody's running from there. Second tower.
This is the 9/11 Memorial and Museum, which now stands at the location where the Twin Towers of the World Trade Center were destroyed during the September 11th attacks. This entire complex honors the memories and legacies of those who died, were injured, or who heroically served as first responders. This memorial was dedicated on the 10th anniversary of the attacks on September 11th, 2011. And the museum over there was dedicated on May 15th, 2014. To help me experience this incredible memorial and to walk me through the events of 9/11, I'm joined by James Carafano, a national security and foreign policy expert with the Heritage Foundation. James, thanks so much for joining me today.
Good to be with you.
Appreciate it very much. So I understand you were here at Ground Zero shortly after the attacks of 9/11. If you would, walk us through the events of that day. Take us back to that morning, and how did that day begin to unfold?
Today could be 9/11. It was exactly like this. It's actually about the same time of day, completely unremarkable in every possible way. It was just a September morning. The weather was actually kind of pleasant. And if you look around, people were doing exactly the same thing. They were walking to work. It was just business as usual. A little more traffic because back then you had the 2 World Trade Center buildings, which were literally kind of the heartbeat of Manhattan.
Right.
And so they were surrounded every day. People coming to work. It was an absolutely, completely unexceptional day. We were still just, a little more than a decade out from the end of the Cold War, when the end of history had happened, and nobody could envision America ever being challenged ever again.
ولكن نقول عن يرفع فيه راية الجهاد ويعبئ الأمة.
Osama Bin Laden, who was the head of Al-Qaeda, who organized the 9/11 attacks, he went to Afghanistan to lead what was called a jihad. And at the time, they were actually aimed at fighting the Russians, getting the Russians out of Afghanistan. And he linked up with a group called the Haqqani Network, who introduced them to the Taliban, who were fighting against the Russians. And this was essentially their jihad, their religious moment of freeing the world from the infidels. And after the war with the Russians, they stayed and they trained, and they really trained an army that was going to lead a revolution. Bin Laden went back to Saudi Arabia. Remarkably, the Saudi government really wasn't very excited about him leading a revolution and overthrowing the order in the Middle East. He was chased out of Saudi Arabia and went to Africa. He was chased out of Africa and he wound up back in Afghanistan, and he blamed America. America was at fault. They couldn't overthrow the old order and spread the Islamist revolution because America was in the way. And so he had to get America out of the Middle East. And the way he was going to do that was to humiliate and weaken America and do an attack that was so devastating, so dramatic, that Americans, as he would say, we were a paper tiger. And once they were struck, it would be revealed that they were a paper tiger, and they would withdraw and leave, and America would be so damaged that the way would be open for the Islamist revolution that he planned. They actually tried to attack the World Trade Centers once, and it didn't work. but he never gave up on that dream. And that's when he came back with this idea of attacking with airplanes. Al-Qaeda had actually looked at that before. Actually, they were thinking about doing an attack on the Eiffel Tower in Paris. But the idea that they had was to hijack planes near the source of the target. And they had two targets, well, or three, we're not really sure. One was the World Trade Center in New York, the symbol of American economic power. And the other was the Pentagon, the symbol of American military power. And then we think there was a third target, the symbol of political power. Might have been the White House, might have been the Capitol, we don't know, because that plane actually went down in Pennsylvania. But the two planes that actually hit the World Trade Center, they took those planes because they knew when they hit the target, they would be full of fuel. And that is really the critical element that really creates this tragedy, because the plane hit the building and literally the building just shook. I imagine a lot of people in the building thought it was an earthquake.
Yeah.
What happened was all the fuel caught on fire, and that created this supernova of heat, and it melted the superstructure. It was really when the second plane hit the building that everybody realized, not an accident, something's really wrong here, and this is a deliberate attack. There's this painful short period where people are rushing to the disaster. Police are running up the building. The fire department is running up the building. Good Samaritans are running to the building. People are running over here to see what is going on. And while that's happening, the superstructure of the building is starting to melt. The fuel just literally sprays throughout the building and sets everything ablaze. And the fire literally overwhelms the fire suppression systems in the World Trade Center. And so there are people above the fire that are trapped. You can see these incredible pictures of people actually jumping out of the building. And again, at this point, a lot of people still don't know what's going on, and so they're actually moving in this direction. And then what happens is the first center just collapses in its footprint, and it creates an incredible mushroom cloud of debris. And people start going in the opposite direction, moving away from this. And a lot of people are actually consumed by the cloud, much like being swept up in a tsunami. And they are covered in this stuff. And of course, then the second building pancakes, and America's just stunned. What happens after the center collapses, people run back to the scene of the disaster. People come here to help. Firemen and policemen from all over the metro area rush here to find something to do. There are bits of 9/11 all over America. For example, the TSA, you go through the checkpoint, TSA. That was stood up after 9/11 to prevent those kinds of attacks again. You go into the lobby of their headquarters, piece of the steel girder of 9/11. Yeah. You go into the FBI building, because the FBI was here that day starting the investigation of who did this. And you go in the FBI building, there's a piece of 9/11. Go in the CIA headquarters, how did we fail America? How did we not get the intel to stop this? That is never going to happen again. There's a piece of the World Trade Center there too. So there are bits and pieces of these buildings all over this country. So here we are 20 years later, and people are just not going by and walking to work. The people that go by this place, they know this means something.
And I'm glad that we take the time and effort and money and resources to build something that makes sure we never forget.
I think they did it right. They remember the tragedy that happened, but they refuse to not go forward. I think it's a great statement.
After experiencing 9/11 through the eyes of an expert who was here shortly after the attacks, I visited the 9/11 Museum and experienced the weight of that tragic day for myself. There were a number of stories of courage, service, and sacrifice on 9/11, especially with the multiple accounts of first responders running into the World Trade Center buildings, while others were running out. One such story involved a Vietnam War hero named Rick Rescorla. Rick worked as a security officer for Morgan Stanley, the largest tenant in the South Tower of the World Trade Center. His prior experience in military intelligence made him concerned about vulnerabilities at the World Trade Center complex. Beginning in 1997, Rick delivered numerous reports about his security concerns, including possible attacks by planes being crashed into the buildings. He even suggested that Morgan Stanley leave New York City and relocate to New Jersey, where it was safer and cheaper. The company wasn't in a position to leave the city, so Rick turned to training the employees in safety and evacuation drills instead. Jump forward a few years to the fateful morning of September 11th, 2001. It was 8:46 a.m. when the North Tower of the World Trade Center was struck by American Airlines Flight 11. Rick Rescorla was in his office on the 44th floor of the South Tower and heard the explosion. He could see the smoke from his window. Shortly after the impact, the Port Authority made an announcement over the building's PA system, urging people to stay where they were and remain calm. Rick knew different. Using a bullhorn, walkie-talkie, and cell phone, he immediately went to work, getting people to evacuate down the stairwells from all 20 floors occupied by Morgan Stanley. He continued tirelessly, even after he felt the impact of United Airlines Flight 175 hitting their tower at 9:03 a.m. Many people were in full panic mode, but Rick kept them calm, even singing songs as they scrambled down the stairwells. In the midst of the chaos, Rick found time to call his wife, Susan. He told her, "Stop crying. I have to get these people out safely. If something were to happen to me, I want you to know I've never been happier. You made my life." After evacuating over 2,500 Morgan Stanley employees, Rick went back into the South Tower to make sure everyone was out. A colleague saw him and told him he should evacuate like everyone else. Rick replied, "As soon as I make sure everyone else is out." Rick Rescorla was last seen on the 10th floor heading up. The South Tower collapsed shortly after that at 9:59 a.m. Rick's remains were never found, and he was declared dead 3 weeks later. The country first learned about Rick's heroic acts about 6 weeks after the attacks in a Washington Post article by Michael Grunwald entitled "A Tower of Courage." In the end, Rick Rescorla was credited with saving 2,687 lives on 9/11. Only 13 Morgan Stanley employees didn't make it out. On September 11th, 2019, Rick received the Presidential Citizens Medal from President Donald Trump, the second highest civilian award in the United States. The medal was presented to his wife, Susan, at a White House ceremony. Rick Rescorla, a true hero to thousands of families who welcomed their loved ones home on 9/11. "9/11 in New York City was a truly tragic morning in American history. People around the country were stunned to wake up and see terrifying images broadcast in real time on their TVs. In addition to the two planes that hit New York City on 9/11, another harrowing story was playing out just down the eastern seaboard at our nation's capital. Next stop, Washington, D.C. September 11th was a warm, sunny day in Washington, D.C., just as it was in New York City and all along the eastern coast. That morning, 5 terrorists passed through security at Dulles International Airport and boarded American Airlines Flight 77, bound for Los Angeles. At 8:20 a.m., the Boeing 757 took off with 64 people on board, a crew of 6 plus 58 passengers, including the hijackers. The last radio communication with Flight 77 occurred about 30 minutes later. It seems the hijackers made their move and took control of the plane somewhere over eastern Kentucky. With one hijacker as pilot, the other 4 kept guard over the passengers. Tracking Flight 77 was nearly impossible since the pilot turned off the plane's transponder and refused to answer any radio messages. For air traffic controllers, the lack of a transponder signal meant they couldn't find the plane until it crossed over a ground-based radar system.
American Dispatch, Jim McDonald. This is Indianapolis Center. Trying to get a hold of American 77.
I need you to tell me anything and everything you can about American 77.
He's heading towards Washington.
At 9:33 a.m., the plane was picked up by radar at the Ronald Reagan National Airport. The tower immediately contacted the U.S. Secret Service in Washington, D.C. with the alarming word that, quote, "an aircraft is coming at you and not talking with us." At 9:37 a.m., the terrorist pilot turned the plane abruptly and crashed into the western side of the Pentagon, the massive headquarters for the United States Department of Defense.
This is Gopher 06. It looks like that aircraft crashed into the Pentagon, sir.
"184 lives were lost at the Pentagon that day. They were men, women, and children. They came from all walks of life, military leaders and administrative assistants, scientists and students, doctors, teachers, soldiers, and flight crew. The youngest was only 3 years old, the oldest, 71. While the act was horrific and all the losses on that day were devastating, structural analysis revealed that the death toll at the Pentagon could have been much worse if not for some critical engineering decisions made 60 years earlier. Ironically, construction of the Pentagon began on September 11th, 1941. America was close to entering World War II, and President Franklin D. Roosevelt knew the country needed a home base for widespread military operations. Wartime urgency allowed the Pentagon to be completed in record time, just 16 months, using 15,000 construction workers. Since steel was rationed for the war effort, the Pentagon was built almost entirely of reinforced concrete, including 41,000 concrete pilings and concrete ramps instead of stairs connecting the building's 5 floors. Completed in 1943, the Pentagon remains the largest low-rise office building in the world, with 6.5 million square feet that can hold up to 26,000 employees. When the Pentagon was built, no one knew that it would become an iconic monument to U.S. military power or a target for international terrorists. In fact, the designers thought it would be abandoned after the war and turned into a massive long-term storage depot. Therefore, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers added excess strength and structural support that would end up saving hundreds and potentially thousands of lives on 9/11. Today, the National 9/11 Memorial on the grounds of the rebuilt Pentagon captures the moment on September 11, 2001, when 184 lives were lost in a tragic act of jihadist terrorism. Each victim is represented by a memorial bench listing their age and location at the time of the attack. The benches are arranged to show those who were on board American Airlines Flight 77 and those who were in the Pentagon that day. Each bench also has its own pool of water that reflects light in the evenings. An inscription at the Pentagon Memorial reads, "We claim this ground in remembrance of the events of September 11, 2001, to honor the 184 people whose lives were lost, their families, and all who sacrifice that we may live in freedom. We will never forget." Shortly after terrorists flew airplanes into the Twin Towers of the World Trade Center in New York and the U.S. Pentagon in Virginia, the 40 passengers and crew on United Airlines Flight 93 engaged in a battle over the fields of Pennsylvania. These 40 heroes came together and fought back, thwarting a planned attack on our nation's capital. On that tragic day in 2001, Flight 93 became a story of hope, courage, and American resolve. When confronted with the urgency of their situation, the passengers and crew chose to act heroically and make the ultimate sacrifice for their country. Together, these 40 heroes did their part to fight back against jihadist terrorism, defending our freedom and preventing even further loss of life. Let's travel now to Pennsylvania to honor this special story. This is the Flight 93 National Memorial, located at the site of the crash of United Airlines Flight 93. Until that fateful day, this was just a regular Pennsylvania field, about 2 miles north of Shanksville and about 60 miles southeast of Pittsburgh. A temporary memorial to the 40 heroes was established soon after the crash, and the first phase of the permanent memorial was dedicated 10 years later, on September 10th, 2011. This visitor center sits on a hill overlooking the crash site and the white marble wall of names below. Here's the courageous account of what unfolded in the skies above me on September 11th, 2001. United Flight 93 was scheduled to depart at 8 a.m. from Newark, New Jersey to San Francisco, California. However, the Boeing 757 was delayed 42 minutes due to runway traffic. By the time Flight 93 took off and was heading west over Pennsylvania, 3 other planes had already crashed into the World Trade Center and the Pentagon. At 9:28 a.m., air traffic control heard screams in Flight 93's cockpit. Moments later, terrorists took over the controls and told its passengers, "Remain sitting. We have a bomb on board." The passengers were herded to the back section, and within a few minutes, the plane changed course and was heading for Washington, D.C. Several of the passengers made phone calls to loved ones who informed them about what was happening with the other terrorist hijackings. One of the passengers, Todd Beamer, tried to place a credit card call through the phone on the back of the seat in front of him, but he was routed to a customer service supervisor, Lisa Jefferson. With FBI agents listening, Beamer informed Jefferson that hijackers had taken over Flight 93 and that one passenger had been killed. He also shared that 2 of the hijackers had knives and that one appeared to have a bomb strapped around his waist. When the hijackers suddenly veered the plane south, the passengers knew they had to do something. According to cell phone conversations, Beamer and 3 other men formed a plan to take the plane back from the hijackers. The other passengers and crew agreed to the plan as it was quietly relayed up the aisle. They decided to storm the cockpit. But first, Todd Beamer recited the Lord's Prayer and the 23rd Psalm, and the other passengers joined in. The Lord is my shepherd. I shall not want. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside still waters. He restores my soul. He leads me in paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. Todd Beamer then asked Lisa Jefferson, "If I don't make it, please call my family and let them know how much I love them." After this, Jefferson heard Beamer clearly shout, "Are you ready? Okay, let's roll." These were Beamer's last words. The plane's voice data recorder later revealed pounding and crashing sounds against the cockpit door and shouts and screams in English. "Let's get them." A terrorist is heard shouting in Arabic, "Allahu Akbar." At just past 10 in the morning, Flight 93 crashed into this empty field at 580 miles per hour. Everyone on board was killed. It turns out the plane was only 20 minutes away from its suspected target, the White House or the U.S. Capitol building in Washington, D.C. As sad as that day was, this was a true story of faith, courage, and heroism. A story that reveals the greatness of the American spirit. This is the final addition to the grounds of the Flight 93 National Memorial. It's called the Tower of Voices. It's a 93-foot tower which will hold 40 aluminum wind chimes in honor of the 40 heroes on Flight 93. It was dedicated on September 10th, 2018, to create a memorial of sound, each chime tuned to a different note, symbolic of each hero's unique voice that day. Paul Murdoch, the chief architect of the tower and every monument here at the Flight 93 Memorial, said he wanted to capture the unity of the passengers and crew as they banded together to force the plane down. Mr. Murdoch said that he could have divided the chimes into subgroups, but instead decided to install each one individually, hoping, quote, the whole group would read as an ensemble of 40. And that's exactly what happened in the skies above me that courageous day on September 11th, 2001.
I can hear you, the rest of the world hears you, and the people who knocked these buildings down will hear all of us soon.
George W. Bush was President of the United States on that fateful date in 2001. Almost immediately, he declared to the American people, freedom itself was attacked this morning by a faceless coward, and freedom will be defended. That evening, President Bush addressed the entire nation.
Thousands of lives were suddenly ended by evil, despicable acts of terror. The pictures of airplanes flying into buildings, fires burning, huge structures collapsing, have filled us with disbelief, terrible sadness, and a quiet, unyielding anger. America was targeted for attack because we're the brightest beacon for freedom and opportunity in the world, and no one will keep that light from shining. Tonight I ask for your prayers for all those who grieve, for the children whose worlds have been shattered, for all whose sense of safety and security has been threatened. And I pray they will be comforted by a power greater than any of us, spoken through the ages in Psalm 23. Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I fear no evil, for you are with me.
Similar to Todd Beamer, finding comfort and resolve in the scriptures, President Bush also turned to the 23rd Psalm for strength. The country was united like I've never seen. American freedom was attacked at home, and American patriotism ignited in our churches, schools, and workplaces. To further explore what happened next in our country and the importance of never forgetting that fateful day, let's return to New York City and reconnect with James Carafano of the Heritage Foundation. So, James, here we are at the 9/11 Memorial in Lower Manhattan at this solemn location, even though it's kind of noisy right now. But this show is going to air 20 years after the events of 9/11. And so many people we know weren't alive at that time or don't remember that day. Why is it important for today's younger generation to never forget the events of 9/11?
Well, this particular part of the memorial is the never forget. Never forget what happened here. And you can do a lot of things with history, and that's fine. But there has to be history that you can take away and actually do something with. So what does this mean? And put aside the fake news, conspiracy theory. I don't trust you. You don't trust me. I don't listen to them. I don't watch that channel. And believe whatever you want. The only doctrine that is unacceptable is hate. Have different ideas, different philosophies, different beliefs. But if your ideas are rooted in hate, at some point it's going to lead to something like this. Osama Bin Laden, his Islamist philosophy, it was never about religion. It was always about power. And it was always about what made me powerful was belittling and hurting other people. And the only way you could really do that was through hate. There's a doctrine of hate. And to me, what this says is never forget that hate destroys.
So going forward, James, This helps us remember the past. One World Trade Center helps us kind of look forward to the future, but we want to make sure nothing like that ever happens again. How do we stay vigilant in our current age where there's so many things distracting us from what took place here?
Yeah, and I think you're right. I think that's the two parts of the memorial that really tie together the past and the future. This says, look, never take it for granted. Despite our political differences, Americans want to live in a country where they are free, where they are safe, and where they're allowed to prosper. All of that was attacked that day. Matter of fact, we lost our individual freedom, sometimes through our own design. Nobody felt safe. You can never take the freedom and safety and liberties of America for granted. And I think the lesson, not just of this day, but of the response to 9/11 is you don't get credit for 2 out of 3. I mean, it doesn't do any good to say, oh, you are safe now, but we've taken away all your freedoms. Or you're very secure, but we have to impoverish you and distribute your money about everybody else. Americans deserve all 3 elements. Flourishing societies have freedom. You can go to bed at night not worry about being murdered in your bed, and you have the opportunity to get up in the morning and make a living for you and your family. And if you don't have all 3 of those things, you're not living in a flourishing society. I think this place reminds us of that.
Yeah.
If you cannot deliver on all 3, if we cannot walk around this site as free people, if we can't, go from here and go back to work and make a paycheck, if we're worried about the next 9/11 and we're more worried about that than the future, then we've lost what's really special about America. You have to fight for that. Every generation has to secure its present. I think what New York wanted people to understand is after 9/11, and the reason why they rebuilt this building and brought this city back is we take responsibility for ourselves and our lives. Take charge of your life, because in the end, that's what will keep you free. That's what will allow you to prosper. That's what will keep you and your family safe. Whether it's another terrorist plotting in some cave somewhere in the world, thinking about, dreaming about the next 9/11, or people here in our own country who think, well, let's just turn America into a different place. Osama Bin Laden didn't change America. If anything, America demonstrated we were way bigger and stronger than the paper tiger that he thought we were. If we lose America, if it becomes a different place, if places like this don't matter, it's because of what we did, not because of what some terrorists did. Yeah, actually, if you read the Constitution, the Founding Fathers wanted to put all these equities in tension to force you how to figure out how to get it right. I think one of the things I love about this site in particular is it's almost an expression of that. People can walk about, they can live their everyday lives, they can go to work, and we cannot forget the obligation and responsibility of keeping Americans safe. I think it's a beautiful symbol of that. Look, Americans did this. We got hit with the most devastating terrorist attack in human history, and we came back and built this. I think it's part of that human spirit that's in us. History is a tool to unleash that, but you've got to go seek it out. It's just not handed to you. America is constantly changing. It is who we are. And to me, that's the one lesson to take away here. This country will be what you want it to be.
This is the Empty Sky Memorial in Liberty State Park, New Jersey. It's dedicated to the 749 residents of New Jersey who lost their lives on 9/11. Liberty State Park is where people first gathered to witness the events of 9/11 happening across the Hudson River. It's also where they returned to remember, mourn, and find strength as a community. These twin stainless steel walls symbolize the Twin Towers laying on their sides. The 749 victims' names from the state of New Jersey face one another inside. The walls channel visitors to the location in the Manhattan skyline where the former World Trade Center towers once stood. In the tragic aftermath of 9/11, it took 99 days for the New York City Fire Department to finally extinguish the smoldering fires at the World Trade Center complex. Then it took another 160 days to finally declare the cleanup and recovery operation over. In the end, about 2 million tons of tangled steel and rubble were removed from the site. Next came the process of healing and restoration through designing and building an appropriate structure to memorialize the event while functioning as meaningful office space for economic renewal in Lower Manhattan. The iconic replacement was finally approved and constructed on the 16-acre site, One World Trade Center. Also known as the Freedom Tower, this is the main building at the rebuilt World Trade Center complex. It was opened on November 3rd, 2014. It is the tallest building in the United States at 104 stories. It's also the tallest building in the Western Hemisphere and the 6th tallest in the world. Symbolically, the building's spire hits 1,776 feet, a deliberate reference to 1776, the year of the U.S. Declaration of Independence. One World Trade Center is a phenomenal building with some of the greatest safety and security features ever put in a skyscraper. It has 3 million rentable square feet and 54 high-speed elevators. In addition to One World Trade Center, the new World Trade Center complex includes the National 9/11 Memorial and Museum that we visited and 5 other high-rise buildings. While some controversy surrounded the final design of the building, the people of New York and New Jersey have fully embraced One World Trade Center, the Freedom Tower, as a symbol that properly memorializes the devastating loss of the Twin Towers on 9/11, yet reestablishes an epic landmark in the Manhattan skyline. I remember 9/11 very well. I was alone in my apartment, spent the day watching the events unfold in shock and disbelief. I also remember the images of first responders, firefighters, and police officers running into the burning Twin Towers while everyone else was running out. These were true heroes, serving their fellow citizens and doing whatever they could to help. It's so sad to me that those same public servants are now being targeted, vilified, and defunded. In New York City alone, first responders were defunded to the tune of $1 billion last year. When I reflect back on 9/11, I see this mistreatment of our heroes as a true disgrace. In the months after 9/11, we came together as Americans like I've never seen in my lifetime. First responders were applauded, churches were packed, radio stations played patriotic music, sports stadiums honored the fallen. The military was revered. American flags flew on homes, schools, and businesses everywhere. Indeed, 9/11 was tragic, but I've never seen such American patriotism, unity, and resolve. While the country processed its grief, it also came together across religious, political, and ethnic divides. We were all just Americans. September 11th is a day to remember an attack on our homeland, an attack on our freedom, an attack on our very worldview. It's also a day to remember our fallen Americans and our selfless heroes. It's a day to remind new generations to stay vigilant in defending our country, our liberty, and our way of life. Once a year, on the anniversary of 9/11, a special tribute in light fills the Manhattan skyline. Two massive beams of light stretch toward the heavens, symbolizing the fallen Twin Towers. It's a profound way to remember the day we will never forget.